Okay. Let's do this. Perfect. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Okay, super. So this is the second session of our 10-week course on the religious pluralism of the Shaykh al-Akbar. Qaddas Allah sirruhu. And thank you very much for joining me. So last time we talked, and by the way, it's great to see all of you back here again. Thank you so much. So last time we were talking mainly about myths, and maybe it was a bit of a mystery to some of you as to why I began the course this way, right? And the reason for that is because um, we're going to get into the polytheistic traditions a little bit and see, is there a connection that Islam can make with them or not? Is there a way that they can be included under the umbrella of Islam or not? Now, we're talking about all religions in general, but I'm also going to focus on the polytheistic religions in particular throughout the course. And so myths are very important, not just to those traditions, but also to a certain way of thinking and approaching religion in general. That's to do with the idea of an imaginal world. You cannot really understand a particular religion or tradition unless you enter into their sacred space, which is their imaginal world. So that's what we did last time. Now, this session is going to properly get into the what we might call the Sheikh al-Akbar's hermeneutics, his approach to religion, and some of the foundational principles upon which his teachings are based. But for the purposes of our course, this passage, which I'm going to read out, is key to the entire discourse. This is where it starts and this is where it ends. So anyone who wants to look into the question of religious pluralism for the Shaykh al-Akbar will inevitably be drawn to this passage. And so this is the passage in question. And if I recall, this passage occurs something like what? Chapter 339 of the Futuhat, if I remember correctly? Something like that. So this is the passage. He says, all the revealed religions, the Sharia, are lights, they are anwar. Among these religions, the revealed religion of the Prophet Muhammad is like the light of the sun among the lights of the stars. When the sun appears, the lights of the stars are hidden, and their lights are included, and this is going to become an important word, which we'll see for the next session, in darajat, in the light of the sun. Their being hidden in the light of the sun is comparable to the abrogation of the other revealed religions that takes place through Muhammad's revealed religion. Nevertheless, they do in fact exist, just as the existence of the light of the stars is actualized. It's something you can verify. It's something that you can actually prove. That's the meaning of actualize. This is done through tahqiq, mutahaqqiq. This explains why we have been required in our all-inclusive religion to have faith in the truth of all messengers and all the revealed religions. They are not rendered null or batil by abrogation. That is the opinion of the ignorant. Now, this is a loaded passage. And so throughout the years in Ibn Arabi studies, there have always been two camps about how to read this passage. On the surface, it looks like a completely inclusivist passage, But there have been people who have disagreed with that interpretation and have said, no, this is actually an exclusivist passage. And if you're asking what these words mean, first of all, please don't hesitate to stop me and ask me about words you don't understand or you need clarification. Questions to do with like exploring ideas and um, exploring concepts and thoughts and observations you have, save those to the end so I can do justice to them. But if there's a word you don't understand, tell me. Now, I think this passage is neither completely exclusivist nor is it completely inclusivist. There's actually a third position and way to interpret that passage. And I'm going to get into that next week. But everything we're going to talk about in this session is because it is by virtue of this passage. What is inclusivism and exclusivism? Inclusivism is the perspective where you are inclusive of other religions and you say, how can I include them within Islam? There's different forms of inclusivism. There's something called soteriological inclusivism, which means you think other religions, um, other people in other religions can be saved. They can be saved from, uh, they can be saved in the next life. That's one kind of inclusivism. Another kind of inclusivism is to say that what they are practicing, they have the right to practice it, right? That's inclusivism. Exclusivism is to say the opposite. It's to say, actually, other religions outside of the fold of Islam cannot be saved. People who practice those religions cannot be saved. And another kind of exclusivism is to say, but and they also don't have the right to practice it. Now you can hold different kinds of inclusivisms and exclusivisms. Like you can say, oh, he has the right to practice his religion, but he won't be saved in the next life because of it. There's even like a kind of a what you might call a epistemological inclusivism or exclusivism, which is to say, which is to do with knowledge, which can mean that the things that some of the things that other religions talk about, they could potentially be true or not, depending on the view you hold. So that's inclusivism and that's exclusivism, right? So I think there is a third way to approach this. Um, sorry, if you just excuse me 1 second. Okay, great. I apologize. Just give me 1 second. Hmm. Okay, thank you for being with me patiently. Okay, so this is what this session is dedicated to. Now, we're not going to answer that question until the next session. So we are going to look at the principles which we need to explore and understand in order to answer that question for the next class. Now, uh, I'm going to go into the principles on which Sheikh Al-Akbar's teachings are based on and the metaphysics which they are built upon, because we're going to rely on them to answer these questions. So the first issue is to do with knowledge. What exactly is knowledge according to the Sheikh Al-Akbar, and what is his understanding of it? And this is going to become important later on, right? So if you don't see the connecting threads right now, don't worry, you'll see them later on, inshallah. Okay, so right. There are three levels of knowledge. One is the level of reason or the science of reason, علم العقل. The second kind is علم الأحوال, and the third kind is علم الأسرار, the science of the secrets or the mysteries. Um, so so these are the levels of knowledge which basically there is no fourth kind of knowledge, and they are to do with regard to not just one knowing God and having knowledge of God and of the divine, but also knowledge of reality. So these are the three forms of knowledge that are all encompassing. These are the three levels with which you can understand the whole reality and of the divine. So you can establish the existence of the divine through the use of your reason, the aql, by the use of proofs and intellectual demonstrations, burhan and barahin, right? Logical demonstrations, right? This is one level. It is clearly the weakest level, though. The second level is to taste the realities, and you taste them through the ahwal, right? The ahwal are the Sufi states. They are the spiritual states that a spiritual traveler experiences on his path and journey to God and to realization of God, right? Now, the Sheikh Akbar says this: the second science, which is the science of states, ahwal, they cannot be reached except through tasting, dhawq, right? You taste it. So no man of reason can define the states, nor can any proof be adduced for knowing them. Um, Take, for example, knowledge of the sweetness of honey, the bitterness of a plant called aloes. Well, just think of a bitter plant. And the pleasure of love, ecstasy, yearning, and other kinds of similar knowledges. It is impossible for anyone to know any of these sciences without being qualified by them and tasting them, right? So, if someone's never tasted an orange, how are you going to describe to them what an orange tastes like? It's just not possible. Try as you might, there is no way to gain knowledge of what the taste of an orange tastes like unless you eat an orange and bite into it yourself. This is that science, the science of ahwal, the spiritual states that cannot be described unless you taste them for yourself. Then there comes the third kind of knowledge, and it is the highest level of knowledge. It is the science of the mysteries, the secrets, asrar. It is the knowledge which is beyond the stage of reason. Now, the Sheikh Al Akbar says it is knowledge through the blowing, the nafath of the Holy Spirit, Ruh al Qudus, into the heart, what he calls the ru'ah in this case, and it is specific to the prophets and the friends of God. Now, this kind of science is of two sorts. The first kind, it can be perceived by reason, just like the first kind above. However, the person who knows it does not obtain it through the use of his intellectual consideration, what's called his nazar, his intellectual reasoning. That's not how he obtains it. But still, reason can perceive that this level of divine secrets exists. The second sort is divided into two further kinds. The first kind is connected to the second above it, which is to do with states. So the first kind is states, but this kind of state is much more noble and it's more complete. Then the second kind are what are called the reports, the akhbar, prophetic reports. And concerning them, one can say that they are either true or false, unless the truthfulness of the report giver and his what is called his inerrancy. His inerrancy, meaning the fact that he's ma'soom, divinely protected, unless that is established for the one who receives the report, such as the report given by the prophets from God. And then he gives you examples, like the reporting about the garden and what is within the garden, a Jannah, right? That's so the knowledge that a Jannah and a Jahannam, heaven and hell exist, that doesn't come from the aql. It comes from a report that's been given to them by revelation, and that belongs to the science of the mysteries. Then he explains further, but the Prophet's words, for example, that at the resurrection, on the day of judgment, there is a pool sweeter than honey. That's al-Kawthar, right? There's a pool sweeter than honey that comes from the science of states, the ahwal, the science of tasting. Then there's the Prophet's words, God is and nothing is with him. God is and no thing is with him. It's a well-known hadith. He says that comes from the science of reason. and it's perceived by reason too. So the knower, the saint who knows this last kind of knowledge, the science of mysteries, he knows and exhausts all sciences. It includes them all. So it's not like a third separate one, parallel to the others. It's all inclusive. The possessors of the other sciences are not like that. So there is no knowledge more noble than this all-encompassing knowledge, which comprises all objects of knowledge. Right? Now we get into his metaphysics, right? That description of knowledge is going to become important because it's going to be connected to the way we understand other religions in the following sessions. Now we'll look into his metaphysics, right? What are metaphysics? In Arabic, they're called the ilahiyat, or the ilm al-khaladiyya, right? The divine sciences, how you actually come to know God, right? You could call them wujudi metaphysics 101. So we're going to get into the basics of wahdat al-wujud. Right. Wahdat al-wujud. Okay, so there are two primary principles that Ibn Arabi's metaphysics are built on. What is wahdat al-wujud? If you translate the phrase, it translates into the unity of being and the unity of existence. The Shaykh Al-Akbar does not really use this phrase, wahdat al-wujud, not really, but it's a good way just to briefly summarize this whole idea. And is the idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wujud itself. Or what is wujud? It's existence, or it is being. It is wujud, and it is being. He is being itself. And it is that wujud is one, and there's only one wujud. You cannot partition wujud. I have my own wujud, and someone else has their own wujud, and Allah has his own wujud. No, it's all one wujud. That is wahdat al-wujud. And the word wujud, being itself, has several connotations, several shades of meaning. One of them, the primary sense of the word, is being in existence, but it can also mean to find something and ecstasy. So from that, we get this triple concept: wujud, wijdan, and wajd, which is being, finding, and ecstasy. And they're all interconnected. God is. This is what it means. And no other thing is. God is the only one who has true existence. No one else has true existence. And what the word furthermore implies is that God can be found. That's the meaning. If God has wujud and he is wujud, he can be found. That's what the word implies. Now, there are centuries of disagreement on the nature of this doctrine, which we're obviously not going to get into. But all the disagreement with regard to wahdat al-wujud can be boiled down to one question. Is wujud a mental construct, or is it a real thing? Is there a reality to it? And we have to say, but obviously for the Shaykh Al-Akbar, it's real. It's not a mental construct. Like if I talk about the wujud of an apple or a horse, for example, someone who says that being is a mental construct says that the apple is real and the horse is real, but to talk about the being of them, what's called in French, their être, to talk about that is just an idea. But in wahdat al-wujud, that's not how it is. It's more like wujud is a thing, but it's the rarest, most refined thing. It's called a quiddity, a mahiyya. And when you partition it, when you when something acquires being, so an apple or a horse, it acquires its existence through wujud. It's just what's called a configuration of wujud, right? If that is not clear, it will become clear soon, inshallah. I'm going to give another example. Now, there are two levels of being, two levels of wujud, which is the ahadiyya and the wahidiyya. Students of the Fusus will already know this. The ahadiyya is the prior level. After that level comes the wahidiyya. So with regard to Allah's existence, the ahadiyya is what comes first, and it is the level that's called exclusive unity. Exclusive unity. The fact that he's unique. Only at this level, only God is. There are no names, there are no attributes, no sifat, and there's no creation. He is the only thing that is, and we cannot talk about it, we cannot know it. We have no idea what it is. And yet it is this level that flows. The word in Arabic is sariya. It flows through each and everything in the cosmos, in existence. But we can't know it, but we know it's there. This is the level where you cannot know God. That's why it's called exclusive unity. You cannot know him at this level, so it excludes you. So there's an ayah in the Quran from Surah Al-Kahf, for those who read Surah Al-Kahf every Friday, right? It's in the last verse. وَلَا يُشْرِكْ وَلَا يُشْرِكُ بِعِبَادَةِ رَبِّهِ أَحَدًا. The normal meaning of the verse is you should not worship God by associating someone with him. In the worship of your Lord, do not associate anyone with him. But there's another way to read the verse. Ahada, ahad is a divine name. So the other meaning of the verse is وَلَا يُشْرِكْ بِعِبَادَةِ رَبِّهِ أَحَدًا. The person who is worshiping God, do not say that this is the ahad, this is the one. Because the ahad is that which excludes you, it rejects you. When you're worshiping Allah, that being you're worshiping, it's not ahad. It's not ahad. Then we come on to the wahidiyya, which is the inclusive unity. This is the level at which God can be worshipped. This is the level at which God can be worshipped, which is wahid. And it is at this level God has divine names and they become manifest to creation. This is the level where God's one being embraces all names, attributes, and entities. At this level, divinity arises. And so does the diversity of divine names and therefore creation. And so we establish a relationship between the divine names and creation. What are the divine names? They are the Asma al-Husna. And when you are worshiping God at this level, you are worshiping one of those names. And creation becomes like a container for the divine names. Right? And we're going to talk about more about the divine names in a few minutes, inshallah. So when we talk about wujud, what is wujud? I like to compare it to Play-Doh, right? You can make any shape out of Play-Doh, but it will always be Play-Doh. And any shape you make out of Play-Doh, that is a specific configuration and determination of Play-Doh. The word that we like to use in this field is called entification, ta'ayyunat. These objects are ta'ayyunat of Allah's wujud. Wujud is like that. So everything is comprised of wujud, and therefore Allah's wujud, which belongs to him. Every single thing. And so therefore, furthermore, some things have more wujud, some things have less wujud. Which means some things manifest Allah's wujud more, and other things manifest his wujud less. Another way of comparing this and understanding what wujud is to compare it to a series of fun house mirrors, and we've talked about this in our most recent Fusus class. Every object of existence is a reflection of the one entity in reality. There's only one object with a capital O, and the rest of creation are just mirrors of that object. Different shaped, different sized mirrors. Each image reflects God, the one object, but the image is by definition non-existent in comparison with its object of reflection. That's why all beings are non-existent, and there's only one true existent. Now, what connects the divine essence to creation? It's the divine names, al-Asma al-Husna. They exist at the level, of course, as we said, at the level of the Wahidiyya. Individual objects of creation, what are they? They are instantiations of the divine names. Instantiation means they are manifestations of the divine names. So, for example, we talked about an apple earlier on. An apple is an instantiation or a manifestation of the divine name Ar-Razaq, the nourisher. The sun is an instantiation of the name An-Nur. It's the same with the light of knowledge. It comes from the divine name An-Nur. Any object you can point to in existence is going to be under the governing property of one of the divine names. Nothing lies outside of their scope. Anything you look at, it's being governed by some divine name. This is another way of understanding the Shahada. La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. That's one of its meanings. So, for example, there is no nourisher. La razaq illa ar-razaq. There's no nourisher but the nourisher. La nur illa an-nur. There's no light but the light. There's no beauty but the beautiful. Anything you see that's beautiful in existence is just a reflection of al-jamil. And there's no might or strength except in the strong. And there's no one who's wise but al-hakim. And there's no one who's alive except al-hayy, and so on and so forth. Until you finally get to there is no wujud but Allah. Furthermore, they are correlational. The divine names don't exist without the things they govern. So there's no Rabb without a Marbub, and there's no Rahmah without a Marhum, and so on and so forth. The divine essence stands separate. غَنِيٌّ عَنِ الْعَالَمِينَ. It does not need anything. But the divine names aren't like that. The divine names are not like that. They cannot exist unless there's a cosmos to rule over, for them to rule over. Yeah? Now, Wahdat al-Wujud is a massive science, and we have not done justice to it by any stretch of the imagination. So Sheikh Al-Akbar warns you, beware of attempting to grasp a science, beware of trying to grasp it too quickly, a kind of a science whose depth is like the ocean. Beware of trying to grasp that kind of science too quickly, you will drown, right? So it's something that you learn slowly and over time. Now, an example of this is a student of the great Arif Billah Ohad al-Din Baliani, and he's even kind of like more explicit than the Sheikh Al-Akbar. He says, I think something like, Allahu faqat. There is nothing in existence but Allah. Allahu faqat, and that's it. So he had a student, and the student heard these teachings. So the student went to a snake, and he just grabbed the snake, because the snake is Allah, right? Then the snake bites him. And he runs back to the Sheikh, Ohad al-Din Baliani. And he said, you told me the snake was Allah and it bit me. And then Ohad al-Din Baliani said, yes, but Allah in his form as a snake wants you to be afraid of him in that form. Because you have divine names that are Jalal and divine names that are Jamal. So you had the wrong approach to that particular form. And then, because he's a wali, he passed his hand over the area where the snake bits him and he was cured. Right? That's a cautionary example story of trying to grasp a science that quickly. You can invoke Ahad as a name. It's technically possible, but there's a haqiqah to Ahad, but you won't get its reality. You cannot grasp the reality of Ahad. You cannot grasp the martaba, the divine level of the Ahadiyya. That's the level you can't grasp and know. But you can know Ahad in other ways. I suspect that is the case. Okay. So thus, the divine names demand appropriate responses to them. You cannot treat each divine name the same. Yes, Sana, go ahead.
Does it mean that we can perceive the martaba of Ahad through a reason, like you mentioned earlier? Like
Yeah, so you cannot perceive it directly, but you just perceive that it exists.
Yeah, yeah,
And in
right,
the same in the same way, you can't perceive God directly. That's impossible. He's too holy to be perceived. But I can perceive that he exists.
right. Thank you.
And so this is why we have the Sharia. The Sharia tells you how to approach Allah through his names. What is the correct manner you do it in order not to be drowned out by this science. So we said what wujud is, meaning where can God be found? Well, he can be found in five divine presences. This is called the five divine presences. And God can be found in each and every one of them. The highest level is called the presence of knowledge. This is the presence of the ayana thabita. If you have access to this martaba, you see yourself as God sees you. And that has a whole lot of implications, which I won't get into. Then there is the world of spirits, the level that's below that. And so this is the world of spirits and angels and intellects. If this is a word that confuses you, why is it at this martaba? Ask me later. It is the presence of unembodied meaning, and it includes God's first creation, which is the universal intellect, which is called al-aql al-kulli, or the supreme pen, al-qalam. This world is luminous. It is subtle, which means it is nurani, and it is latif. It's not kathif. The opposite word is kathif. This world is latif, and it is closer to singularity than the worlds below it. It's not. It does not really manifest multiplicity. Below that is the martaba called the world of the imagination. It's also called the world of the image exemplars, right? And it is at this level, which is a level that's in between all the other worlds. So the other worlds meet them, and the other worlds meet this level in the middle, and it stands in the middle, right? This is the martaba where spirits become embodied and appear to prophets and saints in visions. This is where dreams take place. And it's also the barzakh, which people go to after death. And it's also where our moral qualities become personified and ascend. Okay? This is also where Allah's vast earth, al-ard al-haqiqa, or ard Allah al-wasi' is. This is where it is. I'm using a lot of words which you may not understand. Please ask me again at the end of the session for clarification if you need clarification. Because the idea is simple, but it's just the terminology you have to grasp. And below that is the lowest world, which is called the world of bodies. And so this world is, of course, darker, whereas the world of the spirits is light. Yeah? This is the world of multiplicity, whereas the world of spirits is the world of singularity, right? So they're kind of like they stand as opposites. So this world, the world of bodies, extends from the throne, the arsh, which is also called the starless heaven, to the footstool, what's called the kursi, which is the heaven of fixed stars, and it runs through the seven heavens, finally down to earth. And this world is dense, it's kathif, whereas the world of spirits is latif. Then you have the last hadra, the last world, which is insan and kamil, who is a world unto himself or unto herself. Perfect man or woman acts as a receptacle for all of wujud and all the perfections of wujud. He does not delimit and define being, right? Because we said before that if you talk about an apple or a horse, it's a delimitation on wujud. It is a taqid of wujud. It's just a specific configuration of wujud. Whereas insan camel doesn't do that. Insan Kamil has no limitation, and he does not limit wujud. He does not limit and define wujud such that some of its perfections become visible whilst others are hidden. Hence, it is said that perfect man has no entity, he has no ain, he is no thing. And you'll find this a lot in Taoism when we talk about the perfect person. He has no entity, he is no thing. For the entity, which is the ain, is that which is non-existent in itself, and it detracts from wujud's pure radiance. So pure wujud, which is like wujud al-mahad, right? Or wujud al-tharaf, is compared to pure light. You can't see anything. So if you want to see the objects of wujud, you have to take away a little bit of light, which means you become defined, you become delimited, right? So perfect man reflects pure being. In this sense, he himself is nothing but sheer being, al-wujud al-mahad, and is therefore non-entified. In short, no matter how much we speak of this and that, things, attributes, colors, entities, delineations, characteristics, properties, these are all nothing but the radiation of wujud, and they are non-existent in themselves. Only the one being is. Yes, Ataf. Inshallah, we can add the Arabic word in the end when I send you the slides, inshallah. Okay, so now we can get into Ibn Arabi's hermeneutics. How does he approach um, the Quran and the Sunnah and the Sharia? What is his approach to the foundations of the law? Well, the universe has what you might call a quaternary structure. Quaternary means four. It's based on four dimensions. So the universe is made through four mother names: Al-Hayy, Al-Alim, Al-Murid, and Al-Qadir. That's why we have four elements: fire, water, air, and earth, which is why we have four realities that pertain to nature: heat, dry, wet, cold, and the list goes on, actually. So reflecting this cosmological reality and structure, we have four foundations in the Sharia. What are they? Quran, Sunnah, Ijma', and Qiyas. Now, I put Qiyas in question mark because it's something that Sheikh Al-Akbar admits as a valid source of law, but he admits it with a little bit of grudgingly. Maybe I should have better adab, that's not the right word. But he admits it hesitantly because there are issues with Qiyas. But it is so. Ibn Arabi has a more ambiguous approach to Qiyas as a source of law, but nevertheless, it has a true foundation. So it is a valid source of law. What is Qiyas? We're going to come back to this. But Qiyas means analogical reasoning, right? How does the Sharia work? When a faqih is presented with a legal question, a mas'ala, he must find the answer to that mas'ala in the Quran or the Sunnah or in Ijma'. If it's not in there, by the way, if you don't know what the word Ijma' means it is the consensus of the Sahaba. So if we say that all the Sahaba agreed on a certain mas'ala, that becomes law. If they all agreed on an issue. If you cannot find the answer to a legal question in one of those three things, then the jurist will use something called qiyas. He will try to find an analogy, or he'll try to find another legal problem that already existed and make it analogous to the new situation he is presented with. Now, one of the Sheikh Al-Akbar's primary hermeneutics, primary methods and methodologies is that everything can be found in the Quran, because the Quran itself is the book of existence. And by the way, the word, the jadr of Quran, qarana, qaf, ra, noon, means to gather everything together. That's what it means. Actually, sorry, it's not qaf, it's qaf, ra, hamza. So you might ask, well, wait, I thought the word means qira, means to read, to recite. It does. But the second meaning means to gather, which means jama'. So one of the meanings of qara'a means jama', to gather together. So the Quran, and by the way, there's more to say about that, but I'm going to say that for another session. The Quran is the book that gathers all the haqa'iq into itself, into one book. That's why the Quran says, um, I don't have the Arabic in my head, but something like, وَمَا فَرَطَ مِنَ الْكِتَابِ شَيْء, something like that. There's nothing we have left out of the book, right? We have left nothing out of the book. Everything in wujud is in the book. That is why Abu Madian says he is not a true murid if he does not find everything he wishes for in the Quran, because it contains everything. Now, if everything can be found in the Quran, what is the Sunnah? Rasulullah is just what? He's the walking Quran. You've got the Quran as a book, and you've got the Quran on two legs. That's Rasulullah. This is according to a well-known hadith. So everything can be found in the Quran and the Sunnah. If everything can be found in the Quran and the Sunnah, that means for Shaykh Al-Akbar, we don't need qiyas, according to him. So he will never use qiyas to try and find a solution to a legal problem. All solutions to all legal problems can be found in the Quran and Sunnah, right? So he will not use qiyas. Why does he dislike qiyas? By the way, some of you have done the reading. Well done to you, by the way. I'll just quickly put this question to you. Why does Shaykh Al-Akbar dislike qiyas? Okay, this might be my fault. I should have added more pages. But he dislikes qiyas because when we say that nothing has been left out of the book, there's another ayah in the Quran, which is well known, which Allah SWT says, "Today I have completed your religion for you." So the religion is complete. It requires no addition. What qiyas does, or it doesn't necessarily have to do it, but what often happens is that through qiyas, new ahkam, new legal rulings are added to the religion that then multiply and make the religion burdensome. You see? That's why he doesn't like it. If it's not in the Quran or the Sunnah, he does not want to use a tool like qiyas to add burdens to the religion. We're going to come on to that in a minute as well. So let's go through an example of how this works, right? Jurists will use qiyas to find the answer to a question when they encounter a scenario that's not explicitly addressed in the Quran or in the Sunnah. Even ijma'. So if you don't find it in ijma'. So what is an example? The legal jurists give this example. Now, in the Quran, it says, do not say to either of your parents, uff. What's uff? It's the word of irritation, like uff. Don't say that to them, right? So that scenario is in the Quran, just as an example. But what about a scenario where, let's say, someone beats, this is a very bad child, he beats his parents with a stick. Now, the Quran doesn't talk about beating parents with a stick, but I have to give a hukum. So how do we do that? Beating parents with a stick is not in the Quran. So what do we do? The method of qiyas is this. If you cannot even say oof to your parents, which is the smallest thing one can do, then you cannot do something more severe than that, which is to beat them with a stick, which is bigger than saying oof. So in other words, one has to make an inference and a rational deduction, which is fine. Actually, the Sheikh Al-Akbar would not have a problem with that qiyas, but we're just showing you how the method works. So qiyas depends on certain scenarios not existing in the Quran. Then the new rulings become invented, thereby increasing the number of burdens on the faithful. But this is not Ibn Arabi's way. For him, he works with certain principles. There's no need to invent legal rulings. The ahkam, everything is already in the Quran. Right? So we look for the actual verses that encompass the action in question. In this case, we find it in Surah Baqarah. There's a command, something like وَبِالْوَالِدَيْ إِحْسَانًا, or be kind to your parents. That's a command, right? That's a positive command. Be kind to your parents. That includes the prohibition of beating someone with a stick, because beating them with a stick is not kindness to a parent. So it already includes that, right? So the Quran includes everything. So, like, for example, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf gives this example where someone, I think he's like a non-Muslim, he's skeptical. He's like, the Quran doesn't contain everything. So someone said to the man, yeah, it does. So the guy's like, okay, what's the recipe for, what's the recipe for making bread? How's that in the Quran? Then the man just replied without missing a beat. If you don't know something, ask those who know. That's a verse in the Quran. So the verse in the Quran contains the recipe for making bread by saying, if you don't know what it is, go ask those who know. So it truly contains everything from that perspective, but it contains everything in what's called a synoptic form, mujmal, not tafsilan, mujmal. Okay. So thank you, Aitaf. That's precisely the point. The Quran contains the principles for new situations. Now, so the all comprehensiveness of the Quran is one principle. The second principle is his literalism. Literalism. For Ibn Arabi, outward form and inward meaning are equally important, but nevertheless, the outward form is where the kernel lies. So the Sheikh Al-Akbar says, he says, it's not in vain that God takes one word away to prefer another word to it. What is literalism? It's not the stupid literalism that some people practice that says, oh, Allah has a hand, therefore it's a human hand. No, 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 no. This is a method that requires razor sharp attention. You pay razor sharp attention to the word of God and what he says. You pay attention to each word, each harf, each letter, each haraka. You notice the shape of the letters. You notice the order of the words. Nothing is accidental. This is another one of the foundations of his methods. It requires a very deep knowledge of the Arabic language. This is what Chodkiewicz calls the sovereignty of the letter. It means paying attention to God's ikhtiyar. Why does he choose certain words over another? All right. Even in qira'ah and when you are reciting the Quran, tajweed, even the number of maddas, like if it's like one madda, 2, 3, that has a meaning. So there's lots of examples, but since we don't have time, I won't go through all of them. But okay, let's take the first example, right? Where Allah says, وَرَحْمَتِي وَاسِعَتْ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. Well, if you read that literally, that means his mercy encompasses all things. That includes Iblis. Even though we know that in another verse, for example, the mushrikun are damned, for example. They're not, shirk is something that Allah does not forgive, for example. But he's just told you in this verse that his mercy encompasses all things, including people like Iblis. And so one of the awliya of Allah, his name is Sahal Tustari, he sees Iblis in a vision and he says, you're damned. And then Iblis says to him, you know, Sahal, limitation is your attribute, not Allah's. Taqeed is your attribute, not his. Because Allah says in the Quran, this verse. Now, shay'un is what's called a nakira, and it's called ankara and nakirat. It's the most unknown of all things. So I am a thing. So his mercy encompasses me. That's Ibn Arabi's literalism, for example. And this stunned Sahel al-Tustari, right? Okay. What is the result of this? The result of this is that we end up with multiple interpretations that become possible because you stick to the letter of the word. So sticking to the letter of the word and literalism opens up possibilities. It does not restrict them, right? It opens up possibilities and therefore becomes more inclusive. Sorry, Aitaf, can I save your question to the end, please? But just remember it, and I will address it. Apologies for that. What happens when there is more than one interpreter of the Quran who disagrees on the meaning of a word of the divine text? So the Sheikh Al-Akbar says that when we talk about the word of God, where that is concerned, when it is revealed in the language of a certain people, and when those who speak this language disagree as to what God meant by a certain word or group of words due to the variety of possible meanings of the words, each of them, however different their interpretation is, effectively comprises what God meant. So if you got Mufassir A, Mufassir B, Mufassir C, Interpreter A, Interpreter B, and Interpreter C, they all disagree on what a certain verse or word means, but it's within the Arabic language. They're all correct. Allah is speaking to each one of them differently because the nature of the Arabic language includes different possibilities and different meanings. That's because it's due to what's called its radical trilateral root. Its radical trilateral root. Its jadr is what opens it up to other possibilities, right? As long as you're within the confines of the language, its meaning is sound, no matter how different it is from a different interpreter. And then the Shaykh Al-Akbar says, the one who understands all the different facets of God's divine word, the different faces, he has been given wisdom and the decisive judgment. And that is the faculty of distinguishing among all these different facets and faces. So literalism can even determine the way you approach a legal question with different outcomes for different people. So Chodkovitz says, what is in question here is the authority of the name, حكم الاسم. This is the other principle, حكم الاسم, the tasmiyah and the secret of naming, tasmiyah, which leads us to the very heart of Ibn Arabi's method. Leads us to the very heart of Ibn Arabi's method. So let's go through an example with regard to the secret of naming, tasmiyah, which is connected to literalism. Like, why did you choose this word? Okay. So Sheikh Al-Akbar recites a story from Imam Malik in the Futuhat. And this is it. Malik bin Anas was asked, what is your opinion about the lawfulness of the flesh of the water pig? Right? Khanzir al-ma. Khanzir al-ma is, what does he mean by water pig? He means a dolphin. Are you allowed to consume dolphins or not? Right? So then Imam Malik replies by says, Fa'afta, which means he's giving his actual fatwa. Right? He says that it's haram, you're not allowed to eat dolphins. So then someone objected, but isn't a dolphin a fish? Doesn't he belong to the family of maritime animals? Right? So then Imam Malik said, yeah, sure, but you call it a pig. Why is that significant? Can someone tell me? According to this literal method, why is that significant?
It reminds me of the narration where it's like if you're in doubt about something, then leave it.
But Maham, isn't there a verse in the Quran about swine and pigs?
Oh, sorry.
There's a verse, right?
وحرم عليكم أكل الميت والخنزير.
Yes. So according to this literal method, Allah didn't specify what khanzir it is. Water khanzir, when pigs fly in the air, if we ever find those. He said pig, which means, so Malik said, but you call it a pig, a water pig. Therefore, according to the Quran, it's haram for you, which is really fascinating. Because maybe a different culture says, we don't call dolphins water pigs. We call them something else. So that might be halal for them, but haram for you. Because what did you call it? You called it khanzir? Then the Quran says water pigs and land pigs aren't allowed in general. I hope that makes sense. Otherwise, ask me again at the end of the class. So connected to literalism and the Quran's all comprehensiveness is the question of ibahiyya, what is permitted in the religion. And connected to that is the law's burden of the Sharia. Now the Shaykh Al-Akbar says, Sharia is the road What does the word mean? It is the road that leads to the watering hole of eternal life. Now, walking the road means traveling, right? And traveling is a burden. Traveling is a burden. So Rasulullah wanted to reduce burdens. He did not want to increase them. This is shown in the hadith of the Hajj. When someone was asking Rasulullah, do we have to do Hajj every year? He kept silent. The man asked him 3 times. And Rasulullah said, listen, if revelation came down from heaven to answer your question, you would have to do Hajj every single year, and that would become wajib on you. So please don't ask me questions. Leave me as long as I leave you alone. Don't ask me a lot of legal questions. Right? Why is that? Because wait, Sana, you asked this question earlier on. The original status, the hukum of all things, is listen to this, al-ibaha al-asliya. Al-ibaha al-asliya. Everything at its root is permissible. That's the root of it. Until you find something where Allah makes it forbidden. But that's not the original root. The original root is all things are permitted. So therefore, when you encounter a scenario that Allah does not address in the Quran, we talk about the legal questions that aren't addressed, right? God's silence is precisely his plenitude. There's no such thing as God being silent. If he is silent on a certain legal matter, right? You're like, oh, what happens if I encounter a new scenario? And it's not in the Quran or Sunnah. Look again. His silence is him speaking. His silence means al-ibaha. He is silent on it precisely because it means it is permitted. Because the asl of all things is permissibility until you forbid it. So if Allah does not speak on something, it's permitted. Unless you find it in the Quran and Sunnah where Rasulullah and Allah say that it's forbidden. This is why Ibn Arabi discourages qiyas. Because why should I make a new ruling that's made analogous to a previous scenario when it's already addressed in the Quran and the Sunnah, one way or another? Why should I do that? Now, the Shaykh al-Akbar does not forbid other scholars from using qiyas. They may use it. And its purpose is noble as long as it does not add to increasing the burden of people in the religion since it's already complete. As long as it does not lead to a multiplication of additional many new rulings, then qiyas for him is permissible. But he will never use it. He himself will not use it. Because he should find everything in the Quran. So you should not seek to increase ahkam. The knowledge of the Sharia should be limited according to your purpose in life. God says to his prophet, commanding him, قُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا. My Lord, say, my Lord, increase me in knowledge. So this does not mean knowledge of the Sharia. He means knowledge of him, of God himself, in respect of the fact that he possesses faces, wujuh, in every creature and every originated thing. Kul muhdathan. And this is the knowledge of the reality. He wants you to increase knowledge of the reality and seeing the face of God in things, not the Sharia. Because the Sharia is cut off in the next world. Once you know what you're supposed to do, what you're supposed to know from the Sharia, you get on with knowing the knowledge of the haqa'iq. Right? So the saint, the wali, Shaykh al-Akbar, does not prefer to take his knowledge to qiyas. He prefers to take it from direct inspiration, right? He prefers to take it from the original source itself. And by the original source, the Quran, I don't just mean the book, but the actual divine, what should I call it? The actual pre-eternal word, which is contained in Lawh al-Mahfuz itself. Not just the book that's written in black ink. The actual revelation itself. Because the wali can experience it the way, and its revelation and descent upon his heart the way Rasulullah experienced it. So Shaykh al-Akbar says, when the Quran descends upon an empty heart, he should experience this immeasurably this immeasurable sweetness that surpasses all joy. If he does not experience that, then the Quran has not descended upon his heart. And when he experiences that, he experiences new meanings in the Quran. So the Quran is descending perpetually, always, forever, right? But the heart has to be receptive in order to receive it. So what happens when he does that? The Shaykh Al-Akbar says he receives the oceans of meanings and the multiple possibilities that are contained within its treasuries, because the Quran is the endless ocean, right? Therefore, if that's the case, then he whose understanding is identical to two successive recitations is losing. But he whose understanding is new each time he recites the Quran, then he's winning. Furthermore, Chochkevitz says none of these meanings annuls the preceding ones, and none of them were inscribed from the beginning. And all of them were inscribed from the beginning in the plenitude of the Quran's letter. Even if you find new meanings, that doesn't cancel out the previous ones. The saint waits to listen to God recite his own word back to the saint upon the saint's tongue. And so this is what God says, right? So this is a particular style of speaking. It imitates al-Nifari, right? If you read his Muwaqaf. And so the Shaykh Al-Akbar says, it is I, God says, who, when the saint has his heart open to me, it is I who recite my book for him with his tongue while he listens to me. And that is my nightly conversation with him. It's my munaja with him, nocturnal. That servant savors my word. But if he restricts himself to his own meanings, and he leaves me by his own reflections and his meditation, then that means I'm not with him. What he must do is lean toward me and leave his ears receptive to my word until I am present in his recitation. And just as it is I who recite and I who make him hear, it is also I who then explain my word to him and interpret its meanings. This is my nocturnal conversation with him. He takes knowledge from me, not from his reason and not from his reflection. He no longer cares to think of paradise or hell or of accounting for his actions or of the last judgment or of this world or of what is to come. For he no longer considers these things with his own intellect. He no longer scrutinizes each verse with his reasoning, with his reflection. He is happy, content to lend an ear to that which I tell him. And he is at that moment a witness, shaheed, present with me. And it is I who take charge of his instruction. That is, in summary, his hermeneutics and metaphysics. So briefly, right? Allah is wujud and wujud is one. And you've got two levels, right? And these two levels can be understood through the five divine presences where God is found. He can be found in these five divine presences, right? And Ibn Arabi's hermeneutics, his method, is built on the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma. Qiyas is permissible, but he won't use it, right? And the purpose of the Sharia is to help people and guide them safely to the next world, but not more than that. So one should reduce the burden of ahkam, the burden of legal rulings. So when God is silent on a matter, that is him speaking. That's his plenitude. That means it's permissible when you talk about this new scenario. And that's because the Quran is the book of existence that contains all things. That's what the saint goes to the Quran. That's where he goes to find his answers, which is why literalism opens up possibilities. Now that we've done that, we can get into the actual work itself, right? And look at the solar metaphor that I talked about in the beginning of class. And so there's two things going on in that passage. We'll go through the first thing next week, which is the issue of abrogation, nasakh. What is the divine message? Al-Risalat al-Ilahiyya. What is the Muhammad message? Al-Risalat al-Muhammadiyya. And how is there prophethood, Nubuwwah and Walaya in all beings? Thank you very much. And now I can take questions. Thank you, C. Joshua. Allah barak feek. Allah barak feek, CD Nadir. Yes, Ataf, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. Faris, really for the explanation or further explanation that you just provided today. To ask Ijma'.
Yes.
And what is the position of Sheikh Al-Akbar in relation to Ijma'?
Ijma' is a source of law. It is a source of law. So when Sahaba agree on a mas'ala, it becomes law. You have to follow it. Is that all right?
Sorry, yes. Yeah, well, yeah, I know actually that Ijma' is when Sahaba come to agree to certain things, it will become Ijma'. But does Sheikh Al-Akbar believe it's a source of law?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Because
No. It's a source. Yeah.
Yes, Qiyas from Aimma is a sort or a source of law. But with Sheikh Akbar, he quite hesitant actually to accept it as a
Yes.
source of law.
Yes.
But he has no hesitant when it comes to
No.
Ijma'.
No, exactly.
Okay, that's
تمام بالضبط. Yes, that's exactly it. So Ijma' is a valid source of law. يعني just like Quran and Sunnah. So when the Sahaba have it, you have to follow it. All right. Okay. And thank you, Khadija. I always drink water, don't I? Yeah. There's a reason for that, actually. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, and thank you, Asma and Hana. Allah barak fikum. Sanat, did you have any questions about Qiyas, or was that like maybe a bit better? Yes, Aisha, go ahead.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
I've heard a couple of times in Ibn Arabi's writing about the concept of take from your heart. Have you read that and have you got any comments about it? I don't know if it's linked to when there's some kind of uncertainty or you are exposed to different rulings or kind of decisions, and then there's something of taking the fatwa from your own heart.
He does talk about it. Absolutely, yes. When you, but there is a context to that. Like, you obviously take the fatwa from your heart when you have like a pretty good grounding in the Sharia. Otherwise, if someone has no knowledge of the Sharia and he wants to take fatwa from his heart, that's going to be a bit of an issue. But if someone has some grounding in the Sharia, and then what happens is like, so like, I'll give you like a pretty decent example. There's a pretty good Mufti Yusuf in the States. When he was a child, there was a hukum that he could eat McDonald's, like McDonald's nuggets. I mean, the meat, right? Even though like, is it halal, not halal? But when he would eat it, his heart would feel really bad. So he would take the fatwa from his heart that it's like, actually, these probably aren't halal. It's probably better not to be eating this. So he stayed away from it, and he felt much better. So that's like that's like a good example and application of that hadith. So Ibn Arabi definitely talks about it. Yes.
Excuse me, can I ask you to repeat it again about the McDonald's thing?
Yeah. So like Mufti Yusuf used to eat like chicken burgers and nuggets from McDonald's, but in America, in the States, right? When he was a kid. And that's probably because there is some fatwas that say it's halal. Like you can eat the meat of the Ahlul Kitab, right? But he felt like something was wrong when he was eating it. Like his heart wouldn't feel good. So then he's like, I'm just gonna stop eating from McDonald's. And when he did, his heart felt much better. لأنه هو أفتى قلبه. because he.
But here I have a question here, like,
Yeah, go ahead.
is it really the heart, or is it maybe somewhere seated fear inside of him that I'm doing something wrong? That when he stopped based on the fear that I'm doing something wrong, he felt good.
I mean, we would have to ask him. We would have to ask him to know that answer. But what I understood is that he wanted to eat the McDonald's. So I don't think it was about fear, because he wanted a reason to eat it. So when he started eating it, he felt that his heart didn't feel right with that.
Okay.
So like your question is asking, how do we differentiate between fear and the heart, I guess, the nur in the heart, whether the nur goes
Yes,
out or whether there's nur in
exactly.
the heart. So how do you know if it's fear or if it's to do with the nur leaving the heart? This is to do with experience, and I've experienced it myself. Like when the nur leaves your heart, like you feel really down. It's like, so fear isn't the question. Like you experience like a kind of like a weird depression when you're like, actually, this thing doesn't feel right. It's when you're like, this does not feel right. So it's not about fear. Fear is something else. It's when your heart knows something is off. That's different to fear. Right off, go ahead. Or did you not have a question, Artaf? Okay.
Sorry, actually, I was speaking, but unmuted.
Oh, your microphone. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I wanted actually to agree with you, and I think this can reflect when you do have kind of an inner voice that would tell you to not to do something, even when it is permissible or allowed, because you don't feel good about it. I mean, I think this is kind of a state you reach. I cannot say when you are more spiritual or less spiritual, but it's kind of when you are more true to yourself, and it doesn't happen
Yes.
suddenly. It really takes time and practice. And sometimes even within our life as a human being, you might take different direction at different time at different places. And it's part of your evolution, or it's part of your inspirational journey, I would say. But what is really interesting is somehow when people would take their inspirational journey or inspirational feeling into the field of judgment or being judgmental, or sometimes taking it into where it is more of a fatwa with whether it's halal or haram, and labeling things under halal and haram. This is something I'm very interested to learn your thought about it, which is connected to my second question about interpretation. Interpretation actually of Sharia is very complex. It's not, I wouldn't say complex, but it is a kind of
Sophisticated.
a delicate area within Islam, because the whole logic about interpretation is that we wanted to have an answer to every possible question so we could govern the life of people every time, everywhere, every place. That's the logic, which is so much actually very, I'm not quite sure. But again, if God is silent, then he is silent. And why we would need a fatwa in terms of halal or haram? That would bring us to a
Can I just say something? So the Hanafi madhab is to try and conceive of scenarios, every single scenario that hasn't happened yet, every single situation that hasn't happened yet. The Maliki method, Imam Malik. So this is really interesting. So you brought up a fantastic point. Imam Malik, and the Sheikh Al-Akbar talks about this. He says Imam Malik was showing wara, right? He was showing taqwa and wara whenever someone asked Imam Malik a legal mas'ala. What did Imam Malik say? Who knows this? What is the first question Imam Malik asked the person who wanted a fatwa from him?
Is it that the problem is theoretical, or has it already happened? Is it a real?
Yes, yes. Has this thing happened or not? He wants to know. If the person says it hasn't happened yet, Imam Malik will not give a fatwa. He will say, go back. When it happens, come back to me. Because there's a big issue, just like you're saying, Artaf, with giving fatwas about things that haven't even happened yet. That's a big issue. So this is exactly the Shaykh al-Akbar's method. Thank you for bringing it up. It's much more pious not to give a fatwa on a scenario that hasn't happened yet. And this is the method of Imam Malik himself exactly. Like, you shouldn't be giving fatwas on situations that haven't happened yet. So thank you for bringing that up. That's a really good point. Sorry, Sana, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Faiz.
Fine, Sam.
So, as I understood, what you were saying was, according to Ibn Arabi's exegetical hermeneutics, the way he interprets the
Yes.
Quran, all interpretations of a particular verse, as long as they are within the confines of the Arabic language, are valid simultaneously, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then, so what about verses like verse 34 of Surah An-Nisa, where the word daraba has been interpreted to mean a variety of things, from disciplining gently um, beating with lightly beating with a stick, or like it has been kind of, the interpretations have been controversial. So what about, if I understand Ibn Arabi's method, then all of those interpretations are valid. What about the interpretations which interpret daraba to mean like a harsher kind of hitting or striking?
Right. Well, it's not to do with every understanding of a verse is valid. It's every understanding of the language of a word, right? So what is the word in that verse, right? And I'm not going to get into this issue because it's, as you know, it's a whole issue
Right.
in itself, right? But the Shaykh al-Akbar says two things, right? Responsibility with the interpretation of the verse lies with the interpreter, right? And secondly, he would also say maybe your understanding of a certain word is correct, but you can't ignore what the rest of the Quran says, right? Even if you understand that word to be, if you understand that word in a certain way and linguistically it's correct, it is that meaning, that doesn't excuse you from the other verses and the other applications of the Sunnah with regard to Rasulullah, right? So that's a whole other kettle of fish, right? So the word that I understand from 434, isn't it like udrubhunna? That's it, right? So
Yeah, vadribuhunna.
okay. So where did you get like a severe beating from? That the verse that doesn't give you that.
No, it's not a severe beating, but
Yeah.
it's like but people have like translated it as beating with a stick, or beating or
Okay,
striking.
okay. So let's talk about a stick. It doesn't say stick. According to his literalism, he would say, "Where's the stick?" It's not in the verse. That would be parts of the exegesis, the tafsir. He would say, "Where's the stick?"
Right, but even if it, like, someone says in translates it literally, like strike, or which
Strike.
are
Yes.
varied meanings
Yes.
of daraba,
Yes.
and how would
How would he deal with that?
yes,
Especially, were you here for the previous life course? You were, right?
yes,
Okay, because Sheikh Al-Akbar loves women. He really does. And he has this massive respect for them. So there's no way he would accept these kinds of interpretations that allows one to demean women, right?
right,
So all you have, if you wanted to go for the harshest interpretation of that verse, which would be like a physical striking, it would still be limited by other factors from other verses and other applications of the Sunnah of Rasulullah, who himself never struck a woman, right? He never struck a woman, to my knowledge, if I recall correctly. So how would you limit that application in other ways, right? So that's something one would have to think about. that is something like what is the context in which you can apply that application? And I am not qualified to get into more detail about the subject, so I won't speak about it. But we're only talking about it because you brought up a valid point of what are the limits of this hermeneutical approach? What are the limits, right? And they're pretty, and they're pretty. The limits are pretty far-reaching, right? But what limits it is the application of other verses. But I'd have to think of a specific example just to show you how it works. Because what sometimes someone does is he will say, like, okay, I've got the interpretation of this verse, which accords with language, right? But then Sheikh Al-Akbar says, yeah, but you're ignoring verses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you're in the maqam, the position of the Ahl Kitab, who they believe in parts of the book, they disbelieve in parts of the book, and they take a path in between. That's an actual verse in the Quran. You're doing what they're doing, right? By zeroing in on one verse and ignoring other verses, for example. That would be like my understanding. But I'd like to think of an example just to demonstrate how exactly. But yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Zanira, and then Aisha.
Assalamu alaikum. That was so beautiful, first of all, really touched me. So Jazakallah khair.
Thank you very much.
I also have the same issue with like, I mean, I had a conversation about you or with you earlier about the same, like, you know, thing that Sana
Yes.
brought up about Daraba. And it's okay. You're not ready to discuss that. But I had the same, I have an issue also with, you know, this methodology. It doesn't sit right with me. And it's just even beyond like meaning and beyond what's it called? Taking like contextually and like intertextually applying, like checking if a certain let's say meaning of a word applies to, you know, that specific ayah. So for instance, the word salat used to mean something different. And Allah says here, وَمَا كَانَ صَلَاتُهُمْ عِنْدَ الْبَيْتِ إِلَّا مُكَاءً وَتَصْدِيًا فَذُوقُوا الْعَذَابَ بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَكْفُرُونَ. So salat in the Arabic language apparently was you know, their prayer or their salat at the house was was nothing except whistling and hand clapping. So that's actually one of the valid meanings, linguistic meanings of salat before, you know, in Jahiliyyah. But then you can't say that I'm gonna, you know, if Allah saying, you know, let's say that prayer, salat is kitaba mawquta, that means at a certain prescribed time you have to clap your hands and whistle. No, right? Like you cannot take that sense. In fact, that sense I would say is abrogated in as much as the Quran is saying sallu, for example, or like pray or aqimus salat. When Allah is saying aqimus salat, He's not saying that salat. So then this is how can all of these meanings be valid? Like some meanings, linguistic meanings specifically became invalid with the Quran being, you know, revealed and adding a new sense to them. A salat or like other perhaps spiritual, what's it called, ritual words, I think would be examples of this. But I'm sure there's others, but I just wanted to bring this one specifically up.
Yeah, so you're testing the limits of this methodology, whereby you're saying it has limitations. And so this is your understanding of those limitations. I mean, certainly no one has to agree with everything Ibn Arabi says, right? I would only say that, well, I actually forgot what I wanted to say, but thank you for raising that. Yeah, I completely appreciate what you're saying here. Yeah, so the only thing is what I've said before. Again, linguistically, the other possibilities of the word can be read into the word and verse potentially, but the responsibility of how you apply that meaning rests with the interpreter. That's his general hermeneutic, without addressing your specific example, right? Would you mind writing in the chat the specific verse number for the clapping and whistling you mentioned? Because I'll look into it myself just for my own curiosity. But thanks for sharing that. I mean, so the wider question is, what are the limitations of this method, right? How far does someone take this method? Just like Sana was saying, how far do we take this method? It's interesting to test that out. Yes, if anyone has the verse number for that particular verse, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. And Aisha, please.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have said what I was kind of thinking in terms of context. And there's two things. One of them is what you were saying before about, interpretation and things. And we know in the final khutbah of the Prophet Muhammad, he talks about those who are not good to their wives are not from me or something. But the other part, I think the key thing that you mentioned is about based on the person who's doing the interpreting. And, I'm going to just plonk this in right at the beginning, but it is by men, and the concept of patriarchy is very, very strong in the current Islam that we have right now.
Sure.
And I think we need to hold that in mind with some of the interpretations and the hadiths and things. Just my thoughts on that.
Oh, of course. Yeah. And you'll get different interpretations from female mufassirun as well. Of course, absolutely. There's no question about that. That's why there's a whole field in Quran study to do with, like, I guess, feminist interpretations of the Quran, or even if not feminist, just simply female scholars and what they have to say about these issues. Yeah, I mean, this is a whole subject, but thank you for raising it. Yeah, absolutely. This is a whole entire subject in itself. Yeah. I mean, I have things in my mind I want to say, but I don't want to prolong the session unnecessarily. But thank you for raising that. Okay. Do we have any other questions? Otherwise, I'll call tonight. Yes. If there are any other questions, please let me know. Otherwise, thank you all for coming, and I'll see you next week, inshallah. Thank you so much.
Allah
barak fiki, thank you. Well, and Allah barak fikum, thank you. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.